So the hot rumor going around the last couple of days is that a Chinese data center supposedly lost 10 petabytes of data. And look, you don't even have to think about it. That claim is obviously fake. Let me explain why. 10 petabytes is roughly 10,000 terabytes. Even if you could transfer data at 1 gigabyte per second, which, by the way, is already insanely fast and basically unachievable. In practice, downloading all of that would still take about 2,778 hours. That is roughly 3 months and 26 days. On top of that, you'd need around 5,002 terabyte hard drives to store it all, or 2,500 4 terabyte drives. We're talking about a massive storage array here. So just picture this. Someone supposedly ran a nonstop data transfer at 1 gigabyte per second for nearly 4 months straight. That is not stealing from a data center. That is helping the CCP move house. And I don't care how incompetent the CCP systems are. There is no way they'd let that kind of traffic run undetected for 4 months. So whether you look at this from the receiving end or from the sheer hardware requirements, it is physically impossible. This is a one-glance fake. But, and this is the important part, just because that particular claim is bogus, doesn't change the fact that CCP data security is absolutely riddled with holes. You've probably also seen the recent news about the CCP arresting the chief designer of the J-20 fighter jet and the chairman of China Aerospace Science and Industry Corporation and various other officials. The data leaks and these arrests actually follow the exact same logic. So today I am going to talk about both the data disasters and the CCP's entire tech bureaucracy because they're fundamentally the same story. CCP data management is chaotic from top to bottom. At the same time, the quality of their data is flooded with garbage. And so what we end up seeing is this absolutely absurd situation. Their core databases are hemorrhaging sensitive data on a daily basis, while the regime itself is constantly consuming and producing fake data and junk data. And because the CCP has centralized data management to such an extreme degree, the moment one of their data centers gets breached, it is an all-you, can't-eat buffet. Let me walk you through how the CCP's data management got this bad, because there is actually a clear timeline here. It started in 2019 at the 4th plenum of the 19th Central Committee. In that communique, the CCP officially designated data as the 5th factor of production, right alongside land, labor, capital, and technology. Now, there was a specific reason they did this. They were looking for a replacement for land-based fiscal revenue, the old model where local governments sold land leases to fund themselves. And if you are going to replace land finance, the new tool needs to satisfy one key criterion. Monopoly control. Here is what the CCP was thinking. If they could monopolize data, they could create a kind of cyberland. And unlike physical land, data can be copied infinitely and monetized over and over. As early as 2019, they were already scheming to turn the digital behavior of 1.4 billion people into a new type of state-owned financial vehicle. Basically, a digital version of those notorious local government financing platforms. The Ministry of Finance quickly followed up with regulations allowing state-owned enterprises to put data assets on their balance sheets. Local governments across the country then rushed to set up state-owned data corporations, and so called public data authorized operation platforms. In plain English, what they did was take people's household registration records, travel histories, medical records, utility bills, data that belongs to society as a whole, and hand it all over to state-backed data companies. These companies then claimed ownership of the data and used it to issue asset-backed securities on the financial markets. It was just another way to cash out. The whole scheme essentially converts decades of society's accumulated digital behavior into CCP party assets. They inflate the value, let the financial markets validate it. The CCP keeps the ownership rights, the financing revenue plugs, fiscal holes, and the 1.4 billion ordinary citizens bear all the costs, the price of having their data commercialized, and the risk of being under constant surveillance. The logic chain is crystal clear. But that is only the first layer of motivation. So when did the CCP really start tightening centralized data control? It started with one specific incident. The Didi affair. In 2021, just 3 days after Didi listed on the New York Stock Exchange, the Cyberspace Administration of China launched a so-called cybersecurity review. You all know how that ended. a massive fine of over 8 billion yuan, plus forced delisting from the NIWICE. The CCP's official explanation was illegal collection of personal information. What Didi established was a deeply messed up precedent in China. Any platform that handles information infrastructure, no matter how much private capital you invested to build it, is merely a temporary commercial custodian of the CCP's data assets. Data ownership doesn't rest with the law. It doesn't rest with capital. It rests with whoever holds the gun. One administrative order and your data becomes theirs. The CCP just took its old trick of armed robbery and applied it to data rights. Same playbook, new domain. After that, the National Data Administration was born, a vice-ministerial level agency parked under the National Development and Reform Commission. And if you are wondering whose idea this was, it is classic Xi Jinping. This guy absolutely loves creating new bureaus. Remember, a couple years ago, he set up the Bureau of Private Economy Development. I think it was 2023, maybe 2024, I forget. But things were actually better before he created it. After he set it up, that is when the crackdowns on private business really took off. This year, even Peng Donglai, one of the most beloved retail chains in China, couldn't survive the pressure. So here is the pattern. Every time Xi Jinping creates one of his little bureaus, the industry it is supposed to oversee goes straight to hell. Honestly, I am just waiting for him to create a Xi Jinping Health and Longevity Protection Bureau. Let's see if his own spear can pierce his own shield. Okay, let me get back on track. From that point forward, the CCP's surveillance granularity shifted from tracking population groups to tracking every individual's micro-behavioral chain. Household registration files, medical records, biometric data. You name it, all of it gets funneled into a centralized national data processing and management system. So here's the big question: who actually built this digital surveillance architecture? The answer is obvious. It is the CCP's so-called tech bureaucrats. But what are these tech bureaucrats actually like? Let's look at the most tightly managed and surveilled sector of all, the military-industrial complex. Because if even the military system is this rotten, you can bet everything else is even worse. Just the other day, Yang Wei, the chief designer of the J-20 stealth fighter, and a member of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, yes, that is actually his name, had his name removed from official directories and media reports. That means one thing: corruption. And he is not alone. Tan Raizong, former chairman of China Aerospace Science and Industry Corporation, and Hao Jiaping, the general manager, they've all been investigated or removed from their positions. Last year, it was the chief designer of aircraft carriers who got arrested. This year, it is Hu Wenming, former chairman of the shipbuilding group that built the Liaoning and Shandong carriers, sentenced to 13 years for bribery and abuse of power. These are the people who control the absolute core of the CCP's digital empire, its military tech infrastructure. And what are they doing? Embezzling. If the people guarding the CCP's most classified secrets are this corrupt, do you really think they're going to manage data security properly? Give me a break to them. Data is just another asset to exploit. And the corruption in the CCP's tech bureaucracy isn't limited to the military. It runs all the way through the research and academic worlds too. China's academician system was supposed to be an academic honor, but under the CCP's hyper-centralized resource allocation, the academician title has become a tool for corruption because it comes with real power. The power to approve national-level research projects, the power to control key laboratories, the power over publication in core journals. And anywhere there is power in the CCP system, there is corruption. Full stop, these academic gatekeepers have completely monopolized the flow of research funding. Young scholars at the bottom either attach themselves to a patron or they go nowhere. That is the reality. So what is the result? The entire purpose of scientific research has been reduced to one thing: extracting money from the system. Everything else is just hot air. Let me give you just one data point to show how broken this system is. In 2023, the number of retracted academic papers worldwide broke through 10,000 for the first time in history. And Chinese scholars dominated that list by an overwhelming margin. This isn't a matter of individual ethics anymore. This is systematic, industrialized fraud. BMJ used machine learning models to scan publications and found that over 36% of cancer research papers from Chinese institutions were flagged as having characteristics highly typical of paper mills. And how were these fraudsters faking it? They literally fabricated 7 entirely fictitious cell lines, ghost cell lines that don't exist in nature, and used them to churn out hundreds of papers. AskDM International did a single batch retraction of 147 Chinese papers in engineering materials. So whether it is engineering or medicine, in the fields where academic integrity matters most, these people are just making stuff up. And here is the number that really hits the CCP, where it hurts. In the field of artificial intelligence, 72.2% of globally retracted papers had first authors affiliated with Chinese institutions. What does that tell you? The CCP's tech bureaucrats aren't just failing to protect China's data security. They're the biggest producers of garbage data in the system. That is the top of this ecosystem. And at the bottom, you've got young, underpaid programmers working at outsourcing firms, doing the actual maintenance work for the CCP's surveillance apparatus. Now take that workforce structure and tell them to execute orders for absolute security and total surveillance. And what you get is a very interesting chemical reaction. It is the same thing the CCP does in every other sector. Obsess over collecting and centralizing data, and then put essentially zero effort into actually managing it after it has been collected under this pathological governance logic. The CCP does 2 things simultaneously. It cracks down hard on private companies to monopolize the right to sell data, and it forcibly consolidates all of society's data onto a handful of centralized government platforms. From a systems engineering perspective, this creates the single largest point of failure on the planet. Breach one node and you've got everything, and then they hand these massive databases over to who? To low paid outsourcing teams with non-existent discipline. And then, on the 1st of January 2026, the world found out what happens next. Bob Diachenko, a world-class cybersecurity researcher, along with the 7 News team, disclosed what is now known as the Mega Leak. This was an epic-scale data breach. It exposed 87.3 billion records of highly sensitive Chinese citizen data, left completely unprotected on the public internet for 3 full weeks. Anyone with basic scanning tools could access it directly. And this wasn't rough, unstructured junk. It was a meticulously cleaned, highly structured super database. Those 87.3 billion records were systematically organized into 163 separate indexes, covering everything from phone number-centric profiles to national ID-centric profiles. Names, home addresses, dates of birth, that is just the basics. The really scary stuff, plain text passwords, not encrypted, directly readable, plus massive amounts of private email content. So how was this national-level sensitive data cluster breached? There was no sophisticated hacking involved. Someone made the most basic error in cybersecurity. They left Elasticsearch port 9200 wide open to the public internet, no authentication required, no password set. The entire database was just sitting there, naked. So when researchers followed the trail, this wasn't some elite hacker operation. It was the inevitable result of a completely broken data security system. The CCP goes through all this trouble to centralize everyone's data into one place, and then the hackers didn't even have to do anything. It just leaked on its own. And it gets worse. That data has now been transferred to bulletproof hosting providers, the digital safe havens of the hacking world, where law enforcement can't reach and courts can't shut them down. Even national-level cyber police would have an incredibly hard time taking them out, which means this data is now circulating in the underground black market. And those 87.3 billion records of Chinese citizens' behavioral data have become one of the cheapest commodities on the international market. You want to know how much it costs? $20, the price of a few cups of coffee? That is what the CCP's data management has produced. And we're not done yet. Before the Mega Leak, there was another incident that sent shockwaves through the intelligence community, the iSoon internal document leak. iSoon was a core cyber warfare outsourcing contractor that held Level 2 classified credentials from the CCP's Secrecy Bureau. This company had military connections and directly served the Ministry of Public Security and the Ministry of State Security. Their operations included remote Trojan deployment, stealth mobile surveillance, all aimed at stealing foreign intelligence and conducting real-time precision targeting of overseas dissidents. And then what happened? Hundreds of megabytes of this national-level hacking firm's internal data, white papers, commercial proposals, employee WeChat, group chat logs, got dumped on GitHub for the whole world to see. What did those leaked chat logs reveal? Bottom salaries for the frontline technical staff, employees openly discussing gambling during work hours, and a culture of total indifference toward unauthorized system intrusions outside their target lists. Think about the picture this paints: the people wielding zero-day exploit weapons. Holding sensitive data on hundreds of millions of citizens, they're also some of the most exploited workers in the system. Oh, and I almost forgot. One of the CCP's hacker outsourcing groups was actually behind on paying its own hackers' salaries. That is the kind of operation we're talking about. Soonleak was very likely the work of a disgruntled insider, and this tells you everything about the CCP's security apparatus. On paper and in speeches, it is an impenetrable fortress. In reality, it is tofu. One tap and it crumbles. Oh, now we get to the most critical part. If everything I've talked about so far is past damage, what comes next is essentially a death sentence for the CCP's future tech industry. What is the ultimate goal of all artificial intelligence research right now? It is AGI, artificial general intelligence, and the CCP's information regime creates three causal chains that are irreversibly starving China's technological future. I call them the three structural curses. The first curse is the irreversible oxygen deprivation caused by data being treated as party property. The lifeblood of large language models is data diversity, authenticity, and free flow. This includes things like electronic medical records, financial risk management data, and high-frequency macroeconomic data, exactly the kind of fuel you need to train AI that can make real breakthroughs in vertical industries. But the CCP's entire academic system is too busy embezzling and fabricating. At the foundational data level, they're producing garbage data that gets stamped with the label of authoritative. And because these people are the designated academic authorities, the junk they produce becomes harder and harder to distinguish from real data. It is an absolute mess. Take it one step further. Once data has been converted into party property, does it matter how brilliant a private AI startup's algorithms are? Not at all. Even if they don't produce garbage themselves, they might not be able to access data at all, unless they politically align themselves with the CCP. But the moment they do that, they're forced into the garbage production pipeline. So the competitive landscape gets completely warped. It is no longer about who has the best algorithms. It is about who has the deepest ties to the CCP's Skynet surveillance budget. The truly innovative and disruptive forces get driven out by bad money chasing good. The entire AI industry becomes an appendage of the regime. The second curse is the inevitable trap of knowledge distillation built on a fraudulent academic foundation. Real AI progress requires the accumulation of raw scientific data, combined with genuine algorithmic innovation. But China's enormous domestic literature base is stuffed with fabricated experimental data. If the CCP can fabricate ghost cancer cell lines out of thin air, even in the most rigorous field of medicine, you can imagine what the rest of the academic system looks like. It is more toxic than actual cancer cells. Feed this data into AI models as training fuel, and you are basically force-feeding them poison around the clock. Do the Chinese AI companies know this? Of course they do. So what do they do instead? They resort to massive knowledge distillation to close the gap with OpenAI and Anthropic on benchmarks. They deploy tens of thousands of covert accounts to make upwards of 16 million API calls, systematically extracting cognitive and reasoning data from Western closed-source models. Now, knowledge distillation isn't technically wrong per se, but it exposes an unavoidable reality without an independent, trustworthy academic foundation. Chinese AI has chosen strategic dependency. True autonomous breakthroughs are simply not possible under these conditions. This might be the biggest hole the CCP has dug for itself. The third curse is the recursive censorship death spiral. The CCP's approach to training data is to generate data and censor it simultaneously. This design accelerates model collapse. The CCP has a mandatory regulation called the Interim Measures for Large Model Training, which requires strict adherence to socialist core values. If training data contains more than 5% content deemed subversive in terms of history or politics, The entire dataset faces being purged, rendered completely unusable. Now think about what happens when you train a large language model while constantly choking it with censorship red lines. Every time the AI tries to think, its normal reasoning pathways get brutally interrupted by the rules crammed into it. The result is an AI trained to be a censorship brain, no matter what you ask it. Its first reaction is, "Am I allowed to say this?" This is the fundamental reason behind the principle of garbage in, garbage out. And then there is the Great Firewall, which turbocharges the model collapse process even further. It blocks the world's highest quality, lowest cost data from ever getting in. And look at what is left of the Chinese language internet. After over a decade of Xi Jinping's relentless censorship and deletion, what is still standing? Clickbait marketing accounts spewing nonsense, and dry as dust party propaganda that somehow manages to be even less useful than the clickbait. Try training AI on that kind of hollow, fake content, and what you get isn't an algorithm bottleneck. It is a direct cutoff of high-quality training data. Any model in this situation either starves to death in a data desert or goes the other direction, gorges on so much data garbage that it develops every chronic disease imaginable. Fatty liver, kidney stones, obesity. The CCP's models are either severely malnourished or morbidly obese, covered in digital acne. And that is the end of it, right? Nope, still not done. When the first generation of censored models produces synthetic data that is used to train the second generation, and the second generation synthetic output trains the third, a recursive censorship feedback loop forms. Leading computer scientists have recently identified a well-known vulnerability in large models called model collapse. Here is how it works. If a model keeps iterating on data generated by AI itself, its creativity drops off a cliff. It gradually forgets those rare but brilliant sparks of genuine human insight. Eventually, the entire AI collapses into a mediocre flatline, under the CCP's level of surveillance. These models start the game on hard mode from day one. The high walls block out fresh water from outside. And internally, everything is expressed in the same homogenized, sanitized language, like it all came from the same approved template. Feed that kind of mutilated, endlessly censored voice into AI training. And what are you doing? You are engaging in intellectual inbreeding. And inbreeding produces one thing: cognitive disability. No exceptions. So when you run internal loops with this kind of impoverished data, model collapse happens faster than anywhere else. The bottom line is this: it is not just that the CCP's data security is garbage. Every single link in the data chain is garbage. From data production to data governance to data application across every layer. The CCP is a perfect hexagonal dumpster fire with no blind spots, so don't hold any illusions about the CCP's AI industry. This is the real reason behind China's hardware great leap forward meeting its software great famine. That is all for today. If you enjoyed this, thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.